or is joining us.
I haven't talked to Nathan in years.
Well, I think he's looking forward to talking to you.
Nathan,
there he is.
How are you?
Thanks. Good to see you.
I haven't seen you in years.
It has been ages. Come on in. This is Kimberly, one of my students, who's joining in.
Right.
Okay.
Oh.
I thought that was my cat, but it's yours.
Yeah, no, that's my cat who's saying, don't pay attention to other people. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
No, don't tell me yours is Howard also.
What's that?
Is your cat's name Howard?
No. God wouldn't
Okay.
name it after an ex-prime minister. No, this is Buster Kitten.
Oh,
Nice.
okay.
Has all his own sons.
I don't know who mine was named after. He knew his name when he came to us. So he was always Howard.
Right.
Hello, Button.
Well, people are
And
assembling.
he'll probably show up sometime along.
Right.
I'm getting a step.
I see Paul is joining us.
I am.
Oh,
Hello, James. Hello, Alex.
G'day, Paul.
Bye. You've all got cats on us.
Right. I can't see yours, but presumably you can see mine.
Hang on. How's that working?
Yep.
yeah, that's
There you
better.
are.
There we are. Here's the cat. Off you go, Button.
The famous
Hello.
button.
Yes, Button's not happy because it's raining outside.
Yeah, it's not raining here, but I can't see the mountain. It's about 15 degrees. Good God.
Yeah, it's not that much more than that here. So not bad for summer.
No.
Makes a change from being on fire.
Yeah. Much better than last summer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Paul, are you okay? Are you close to that outbreak?
Oh no, it's miles away.
Okay,
So
good.
it's fine. It's 10 people a day, so they're well on top of it.
Okay, that's good.
You know, it's happened half a dozen times before, so
Yeah, okay.
they're very good at finding everybody and making them stay inside till it goes away.
Yeah, that sounds more realistic than the media down here is a little bit more alarmist, you know.
Yeah, well,
Because
after what happened to you guys, I
capacity.
understand why.
Yeah.
But
Oh, that's good to hear.
yeah, it'll be over by Christmas, I'm sure.
I was to mention to Gareth that my wife says hello. She lived in Kew for a number of years.
Oh, sure. Nice one. I have a number of friends that live there. It's a lovely area.
Yes, well, she is my useful person when we go camping because when she lived there, her house was heated with fireplaces and she was the first one home every day. So she laid the fire and I get out in the woods and have to start a fire myself. And I feel like I've just about forgotten because she usually says, oh yeah, just give me the stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine that. For those that don't know, Kew is one of the sort of grand older suburbs of Melbourne. So there's a few houses that use chimneys around there.
Thanks. I had no idea what continent you might be on, so that was.
Yes, Australia.
Yeah.
Australia,
I was thinking the other Q. Yeah.
So, Paul, are you training today?
No, just got other things on. No, we've finished up for the year.
Oh, okay. We had our last training yesterday, which was we're doing your longsword syllabus.
Excellent, good.
I need to ask you a couple of things that there's a couple of things that like, well, that doesn't make sense, but if I do this, it works much better.
All right.
And a couple of things are like, I got no clue what he's saying here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. We've really enjoying the armor class fetters.
Yeah.
We've got a bulk order of them in at long last. It's only took about a year, but they're fantastic. They're really good.
I love them. The ones that we got. Oh, now she's going to sleep in my laptop case. The ones we got were the first couple that Lewis and I got. They're barely marked after over 2 years, so they're
Amazing.
brilliant.
I find it interesting that Castile started producing feather blades of a similar length shortly after you started talking about the armor class ones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We busted pretty well all our Castiles. If the blades don't bust, the hilts just get smashed to pieces.
Yeah.
We're no longer recommending Castiles, and when they bust, they're a bit iffy on getting replacements to us.
Yeah.
Well,
Sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not.
Yeah.
I've broken all my Castiles, but my local blacksmith has been able to repair them for me.
Yeah, we get them welded back together, but it's much better to have a sword that doesn't bust in the first place, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know what armor class do with their blades, but they do something pretty special with the tempering. That's yeah.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah,
actually, that might be one of the a goal that we could perhaps have with this group is to build up a set of recommended armories, because I know that I've got a fairly constant stream of students coming through asking for recommendations.
Yeah. Well, the ones we're getting for broadswords is the armor class and Alchem, the Alchem sort of staccato model basket hilts. They are beautiful. They're just that really severe distal taper they give it make them handle really nicely. And they're cheap as the last lot came in at like 315 Australian dollars landed.
Oh, yeah, that's
really. So they really are budget swords.
We've got a number of Castiles coming in, but we've also got a lot of swords by our local blacksmith. You know, Tim Harris. For those,
yeah, we've got a lot of Tims as well.
Yeah, for those that don't, he's a blacksmith in Melbourne that has gone recently from amateur to professional, and honestly, the quality of his swords has taken a jump up with that.
Yeah,
I didn't know he'd gone fully professional.
Yeah. Okay. Just recently, like just before COVID, honestly, like the timing was awful, but yeah, he has, and it's interesting, Steve. His the quality of his fine work, like his baskets and so on, has just stepped up as well. I think it's dedication.
Sounds like what I saw with Peter Lyon. He made a lot of swords for reenactment years ago, and then his quality started going up, and next thing I knew, he was making all the swords for the Lord of the Rings movies, and you couldn't get a sword out of him for love or money.
Here's some Tim Longswords. So that's the English bastard sword.
Yep.
Which it's beautiful. It's basically one-handed weight. And then he made me a 16th century complex hilted longsword, which is that one, which is cheating.
That is a curious beast, Paul. Is it good? Is it
It's
fun?
fantastic.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic.
For those longsword fighters that like their fingers, that's cheating, isn't it?
Yes, it's cheating. It's cheating. But you know, they existed. So very
Where is
sensible.
armor class out?
Lewis and I just got long swords with like rings on either side, and it
The
just
English
makes-
ones tended not to have the rings. Even on their bigger swords, they didn't go for side rings. They're all just straight crosses and fishtail pommels. And that makes a big difference. Having the rehand on the fishtail pommel is very different to a round pommel.
How does it compare to like the what do they call, like the teardrop ones that are sort of a 3-dimensional, thinner and
Yeah, reasonably similar. Kind of, without taking it the light, it sits in your hand like that.
Yeah.
So it braces up against there, which allows you to manipulate it quite a. But there's also no way you can do any of the sort of German stuff. Over there, that hurts. But for manipulating the sword in one hand with your left hand, it's very good.
I suppose that would be more registered to the blade as well than the.
Yeah, exactly, because it's you can tell where the edge is even when you've got your left hand on it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Has anyone got any recent experience with Darkwood? I haven't touched their stuff for a few years. Have they?
No.
Haven't got a Darkwood. Their blade started to get very soft. We found.
Yeah.
And Rick says it's because the SEA changed their requirements. And if you ask them, say you want it for HEMA, they will temper them harder back to what they used to be. But they're so expensive.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There are other options out there.
I just can't go past the armor class ones. So
Where is armor class of?
Glasgow, I think.
Okay. And sorry, just checking. Thanks for the heads up. But can you hear us now? Looks like that's a yes. Good.
Yep.
Yeah, we just got a couple of swords from Is it Balefire?
Yeah.
And I haven't beat it up enough to be able to give her or anything other than plays nicely, a little heavy in the guard, but I can live with that. I can also knock holes in one.
I have a Balefire, so I can comment on this. I got one of his prototype Scottish broadswords, the ones he's calling the Angelo broadsword. So I think he made 3 prototypes and then he modified them and sent them out. So take everything I'm saying, it's a smidge different from everything that he's producing normally. But I really quite like it. I mean, as you say, it's heavy in the guard, but I don't mind that, and it stood up really well. This thing has taken a battering, and it's just surviving. The issue, of course, being that he made it and sent it to me, and it was slightly different from what I had asked. And he went, "Oh, let me fix that for you," and then saw the price of shipping to Australia and threw up his hands and said, I can't support warranties in Australia, so we don't take orders from there anymore. So I think, so while it's a great sword,
You ruined it
really
for us.
recommend it to, locals.
I've handled the Balefire Tessac, and they just also released, soft released their Wallace collection A535. And I also got to handle the Bear Angelo blade, because I guess Derek offloaded the Angelos to you in Port Townsend, Nathan, and very satisfied, especially considering, well, one, I don't own them, so that's like the big, but like the Tessac that Derek Steelbaron has been using for the better part of like 2 years, he's done very little maintenance on it, mostly because he's very busy doing other things, and considering that, it's held up amazingly well. Especially the basket. Very nice, very nicely made, very nicely presentable, very protective. And the amount of times that I've whacked him in that basket, considering it's held up extremely well.
Fascinating. How much use does everyone make of sort of local blacksmiths rather than these big international shipping folks?
Well, nobody can afford Craig Sitch anymore.
Yeah, of course.
we do get a lot of swords off Tim.
Yep.
If we want something custom, we tend to go to Tim because he'll do it.
Yeah.
The guys in Tassie, in Launceston, are making fantastic swords. Really, really good ones. It's a side gig for both of them, so they aren't fast, but they're really good. We've got a whole bunch of their really stiff small swords.
Oh, sure.
Which are so much better than any other simulator I've come across.
Okay, I haven't heard from them at all. What's the best way to look at their stuff or reach
Email, I'll talk to us offline and I'll give you their email.
Perfect, shall do.
Okay. Joseph makes the blades, Matt does the hilts, and they're doing really good work, and they're making 3 full-size claymores for us now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Joseph is still very interested in making interesting blades. So he goes, I wonder if I could make a stiff but safe small sword, or I wonder if I can make a claymore that wide and that light but not too floppy.
Sure.
Well,
He's really keen on making interesting stuff.
Okay.
Just to explore it.
All right. I mean, that's great news.
Yeah, but they don't have a commercial presence. There's another local guy that I use who's goes by the name of Frodo. His real name is Adam McKay. Again, he has no web presence whatsoever.
Yeah.
And has generally potted along making and fixing armor for jousters.
Right.
But he does absolutely beautiful, like as good as Craig Sitch work.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm really trying to sort of push him to set himself up on the internet. He made me my English Bilbo hilt, which is tempered spring steel, and it's fantastic. He also made me one of my English bucklers. I'll just get it off the thing. So he made me that. Also tempered spring steel and utterly indestructible.
Yeah.
But how's the reception?
Yes. Oh, you got to be careful of those things. You sent me down a couple, Paul, and I've broken a couple of swords on the edges of them.
One of my projects from over the holidays is to make a proper one, which is going to be leather, because the real ones are actually
The one with the bars.
Yeah. So they had like a web of steel frame.
Oh.
And then it was heavy leather riveted onto the frame.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that once if you've got the sort of reinforced leather buckler, swords are just going to go and just stick to it, which means binding them and catching up is going to be even easier than with
that
the
makes
steel.
sense, doesn't it? Oof.
Yeah. But it's a very traditional way of making them. Wales was apparently the buckler making place.
Oh, all right.
So the Welsh were the ones who came up with the idea in the first place.
I've gone off the big radar dishes because they tend to be used more like a Taj, and I find it hard to do what Silver explicitly tells you to do with a buckler with them. Yeah.
Horses for courses. I can't go back to a flat buckler anymore. I absolutely love the radar dishes.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with you there, Stephen. I've in my experimentation, I mean it's obviously a little bit different because it's not an empty hand or whatever, but the same sorts of techniques still seem to work for me and my students.
I prefer the traditional buckler.
Fair enough.
But I wouldn't mind going for the one, something like you see in De Grazi's, the 1594 translation of De Grazzi, which is quite a bit smaller than the radar dish.
Yeah.
So I want to jump in for a second, if I may. And William, sorry if I'm stealing your role, but there's some people here I don't know, and I'd love to hear where you're all from. and what you're doing. I'm also really curious about like how silver, like English backsword kind of things are going out in the world. And I can't stay on the, I'm going to have to bail before too long. Life, but I'd love to hear who all's out there. Like, hi Duncan, I don't know you, and that's not surprising. But I'll start. My name's Nathan Barnett. I've I've been in silver since Stephen taught me back in, I think it was 02, maybe 03. Was it earlier?
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, I think it was the. Yeah, it was the anniversary of the September 11th attacks, because I flew out of Seattle, on the anniversary, and the security was insane.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, early on. I'm in the Seattle area, actually up in a little town outside of Seattle, a couple hours, little Victorian seaport called Port Townsend. I've recently been teaching, until recently I taught in Seattle at Lonan, and there's some other Lonan representatives here. I was teaching silver backsword in a Bartitsu kind of context. So like there's the other instructor, Tim Riziki, is teaching pugilism. So I was basically saying, here's 19th century backsword. It's just like 16th century backsword. I also have a little group in Port Townsend, and our numbers are probably in like the Seattle group at its peak has gotten up to 10 or 12-ish. My Port Townsend group is like 3 to 4 on a good weekend, but Port Townsend only has 9,000 people. And hey, I want to thank William for bringing us all together, because I don't get to see other silver practitioners much ever.
Yeah. Well, of course, I am the evangelist out in my corner of the world, and I certainly wish there was somebody who was better at it out here, because as my fencing instructor says, I fence with the grace of a spastic giraffe, and it would be nice to have somebody who was really proficient, but I've been fascinated by silver ever since, well, Lucy Easton was the one, honestly, Matt Easton's wife, who got me started looking for silver. And then I found Stephen, and then I found Paul. And it was like, oh. And then I bought their books, and it was all downhill from there. Just so you know, folks, we are streaming live. I don't know if anybody's watching us, but we are. But in the Northeast, in New England, I haven't been making too much headway. People are interested, but I haven't got them hooked.
Where are you?
Worcester, Massachusetts, in the United States. I fence at Worcester Historical Swordsmanship here in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is one of the 2 constituent clubs of Massachusetts Historical Swordsmanship. Ken Monshine, who I think several of you know, is the principal instructor there. And I thought he might be joining us, but I haven't seen him yet. That doesn't mean he won't stumble in at some point. But as I say, I'm a tyro, but I am the only evangelist for the system out here of whom I'm aware. And so any guidance about how to hook people on silver would be welcome.
It's an uphill battle, Will. It's really bad. And Nathan, I'm in Liverpool in the United Kingdom, right next to Wales. And yes, Stephen, the Welsh still do make pretty decent bucklers. So it's quite good. Yeah, my journey is I'm been doing this for about 20 odd years now. Started at the Royal Armouries in Leeds. My main interest has always been about learning how to fight. That's what I'm in any form. Obviously always been interested in, did archery and stuff when I was younger. Always wanted to know how to use a sword, but how to use it properly. tried kendo, tried fencing. Didn't like any of it because it was too sport based for me. So I wouldn't call myself a silver purist, but the reason why I became obsessed with silver is because silver's principles really link into every other form of fighting that I've ever either studied or even tried. And I work with lots of other martial artists, and I took silver's principles back to them. And so far, everyone I've showed it to has gone, "Oh yeah, okay, now I actually get it." And that his principles relate to fighting in general. Obviously, he specializes in what was his era, but it's the principles of silver that got me hooked, and the fact that he's trying to teach you how to fight, and that's what I've always wanted to learn how just generally. I've always had an idea there must be an underlying principle to how to fight in general, whether it's with just my bare hands, a stick, a knife, a sword, whatever. Silver gives you that. And he's the only one I've seen who actually tries to explain it properly and doesn't try to hide it or hasn't got bits missing. So I've only been studying, well, Alan, one of my group, Alan, is on here as well. We've been studying silver properly only for, what'd you say, Al, about 4 or 5 years properly. I've been aware of silver. I said I've been doing humour in general for over 20 years now. And even at the beginning, silver was always mentioned. And a lot of people were very sniffy about silver. And as Stephen Hand will know, still are, unfortunately. And it's one of them things, always known it was there. And a guy called Steve Tappan who taught me an awful lot. He runs a group called the Screamer Concept. He's a professional. He goes around teaching. God, he teaches armed forces. He teaches security guards. He teaches personal security, people like that. He's obsessed with history too. And he introduced me to silver. And I did moved away from silver because, like a lot of people, didn't quite get it. And then eventually, as I learned more fight skills and that, and you come back to these sort of texts and you realize, hold on, you realize what people like silver are actually saying. But for me, silver is the one who says it in the best way. And his principles were, he said, I've introduced his principles to Sambo teachers, jiu-jitsu teachers, karate teachers, kendo teachers, lots of other types. And when we've gone through it, they've all agreed that it's nothing new, but the way silver talks about it and the way he describes it is almost unique. And it gets it into your head really easily. So that's where I'm from. I'm not a purist of anything because my main interest isn't just learning how to fight in general. That's me.
Awesome.
Who's next?
I think why Silver did that was because he felt like the principles were being lost with the Italian rapier fencing, which I'm not entirely sure he completely understood, but
probably not, no.
yeah, but I think he probably would have got along with Marozzo, but he felt like the principles were being lost, so he felt like he had to write it down, whereas so many other people, I mean, the principles are there if you dig deep enough. You know, if you like, you know, studied 133 and you do the plays and you they don't say here are the principles, but if you do everything that you're told to do, principles come out at you.
I agree. I've been working with some Fiore people the past couple of years, and it's in Fiore as well. But again, I just said it's hidden within the plays. He doesn't try and be specific about it first off. Silver's the only one to me who does start with generally this is how you're going to win, and then once he lays out the principles, then he goes through various plays, which then obviously link back to the principles. And that way of doing it to me was just, I don't know, it sort of clicked for me perfectly.
And I think the reason why he focused on the principles was because he saw the principles under threat. He saw people not applying the true principles.
What was it Bob Sharon said all those
now.
years ago? He said something like, Silver is berating the Italians for everything they've forgotten.
Yeah, yes.
And again, I think it's one of them things that every age, every teacher, I think you get it now. You get it in the modern era. I've worked with teachers who really understand this stuff. There are people who've lived it. They really understand it. And then I've worked with like teachers who obviously don't. technically know lots of techniques, know lots of information to give you, but the principles that tie it all together seems lost to them. So I think it's something that in every age it actually happens. And Stephen, that makes sense. That was why Silver did it. That makes sense. That does make perfect sense.
Shall we continue with the introductions?
Yep.
I'm happy to go next. So I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, and I come from a reenactment background. So back in the 90s, I was doing some reenactment, local stuff mostly, and in the early 2000s, I'm not really sure the year exactly. We got Paul here to come down to Melbourne and do a workshop on silver, and that's really got what me started, and so I've been sort of more formally studying since then. And I think that the reason that I focus so much on silver is not because I think it's a unique system, and it's not because I think it has unique insights, but for me and for the people I teach, it's sort of the I take a trunk and branch approach. So it's the common ground that we all have. It's the common language. It's the common experience. So we all study that, and various people also study other things. But because we have this commonality, and I think it is good for that because of the way that silver describes so explicitly some of these principles, as you are saying, Duncan, that looking at other systems becomes relatable across people that have that between them. Were there any other questions, Nathan, that you needed?
I am interested in, like, it's terrible to ask size of groups because it starts feeling like you're being graded or we're doing a comparison. But I'll stand out and say at the moment I currently have 2. So please understand, I'm more interested in just like, are there large groups out there?
Sure.
That kind of, like, what is our touch? And
okay.
reach.
I mean, it varies based on, week to week, and COVID's obviously changed everything. But directly, I probably have somewhere between 20 and 30 students, and of them, like probably 5 or 6 are also instructing in one form or another, and they have a variety between 1 and, I don't know, some tens of students as well.
Well, here I've got 3 classes. I've got about a dozen, between sort of a dozen and 20 in one of them, up to about 30 in the second one. And the third class used to be about 30 before COVID, but it hasn't quite got back to pre-pandemic numbers yet. Still only about a dozen at the moment, but hopefully next year we'll be back up. So in total, I'm teaching, there's probably 60, 70 students in my branches. And we do, like, not just silver's backsword, we do quarterstaff, we do the sword and dagger, sword and buckler. So we sort of, and the long sword as well, which isn't entirely silver. We have other instructional stuff. But we try and do the full gamut of English weapons. And that, I think, is one of the keys. Who was asking about how to kind of enthuse people? I think doing multiple weapons and showing how you can apply the principles with slight adjustments to the techniques is actually really important. And you'll find some people will take to a weapon. Some people will really like sword and dagger, or they will really like quarterstaff or something. And that helps keep them enthused as well.
Is there anybody who has experimented with silver's pike?
No, we have not done the pike. Difficult to transport the things for a start. And the instructions are very weird.
Yeah, we had a couple in our cell for a while. But it's sort of odd when there's only kind of two pikes. They're not really made for individual fighting, if you will.
So Swetnam says it happened. He says they're not made for individual combat. They've learnt, and that's what they do.
Yes, yes.
They do it with pikes.
I've done pike drill with like 20, 30 people, and as part of reenactment, but that's a very different thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, well, we have some reenactors around here who do pike drill as well. But looking at the instructions and then reading the Spanish accounts or the summaries of the Spanish accounts, because I can't read the Spanish, but apparently a few years before Brief Instructions was published, there was an English expedition to the Netherlands in support of their rebellion against Philip II. This was sponsored by Elizabeth, and it was commanded by several people. Essex was one of them. And the Spanish met the English pikemen and did not like it. They did not like it at all. They found them much more difficult to deal with than the Germans. And I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on whether Silver's being traditional, as he says he is, and talking about specifically how the English fight with the pike.
All I know about the drill is that the Germans were, there's two basic types of pike drill, one based on the Dutch that comes from Jacob de Gain, and then the German one, Johann Jacob von Wellhausen. And there's sort of two branches of pike drill, but yeah, none of it tells you actually how to fight with the thing. It just tells you how to move around in formation and work as a unit.
Well, the thing that interests me about Silver is he tells you how to not get hit in the face by the other guy's pike. And I read that, and it was like, oh, so that's what you do when one pike square meets another pike square. You put the point of your pike on the ground, and you hold the butt in one hand, and if the other guy tries to stab you in the face, you do that and cross his point with the butt of your haft, and then single-hand it toward his shins, make him jump back.
There's sticking the point in the ground and doing that one-handed is also in Swetnam's quarterstaff.
Mm-hmm. So it's, I don't know what the tercios were doing, whether they were trained the same way, or whether this is whether Silver's pike system is peculiarly English. But I do know the Spanish did not like fighting the English pikes. At least that's what I read in the summaries of the Spanish reports. They found them a tough nut to crack.
The main way to avoid getting stabbed in the face was to have a very broad-brimmed helmet, the descendant of the medieval kettle hat, and to basically put your head down at the moment you ran into the other regiment.
Mm-hmm.
So,
of course, the other thing that Silver says very explicitly is, if you get his point far enough offline that he can't get it back quickly, drop your pike and pull your knife and go in and shank him. And of course, if you have a bunch of people who are all doing that more or less together, you could break it up, because the front rank or two are the only ones that can actually effectively deploy their points against you, and you wind up with this rather messy scrum of people with knives and swords. And if you've got billmen in the middle of your square and they come through, that could be awkward.
Well, we're going to explore this at the next Western Martial Arts workshop. At the last one, that was the first one I'd attended in 14 years. There was a line of classes called the School of the Soldier, and they were exploring. Got everything. That there was some 14th, 15th century Italian armored combat, but basically looking at formation combat, and there was some ancient trying to recreate a hoplite phalanx, and there was actually a researcher there who's written several books on hoplites, who was collecting data on how much force guys could put against the back of a shield, and that was really, really popular. And I've been asked to do to teach 17th century pike drill. So I'll be exploring that, but I'll look at it initially from the point of view of here's a formation, so I'll be using the standard drill manual that was used for the English had their own drill manual called Directions for Musters, written in 1638, just before the Civil War. That was the main thing that was used in the Civil War, the standard text. But yeah, I'll have to go back and look at silver for when things break down. But the idea is that I get the impression that a lot of this individualistic stuff would have any officer trying to direct the pike block tearing his hair out, and don't be a bloody hero, just stand in line and march forward. So yeah, don't be an individual. Stick in formation.
Do you recall who the scholar was that was kind of leading that charge at the at WMAW?
The guy who was doing the Greek stuff was a guy called Paul Bardunius, who's written a pretty good book on hoplite warfare. And then there was Greg Mealy and Christian
Cameron.
Christian Cameron, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, they were doing the Italian infantry combat from the 14th, 15th century. So spear and rotella, and spiedo and rotella, and very interesting.
Nice.
I know a guy who's local. Talking about pikes and that, I know a guy who's local, kind of SCA adjacent, and he uses a couple of Silver's techniques. Like he'll do he'll flick up the point with his foot and stab people with it, and he'll close in and he'll shorten the pike considerably and just stab with the shortened bit of it, as in a knife thing, and he does that quite effectively. So these techniques can work against all sorts of different weapons.
Who is it?
I haven't. So that's the guy Avalock who does the Empire of Medieval Pursuits.
Okay.
He's actually he does Battle of Nations these days mostly. He's one of the big organizers for that, and so we've got a big contingent of people, but they're not allowed to stab people, so he saves that for his EMP group. But yeah, that's probably my closest seeing someone actually pulling off Silver's pike stuff.
Is that more individual or formation?
That's one-on-one kind of fighting. So
I think one-on-one, I'd take pretty much anything rather than a pike. When I was doing reenactment, our group actually sat down and made, rather than just about every pike I've ever seen has got like a uniform thickness shaft, and we actually made pikes based on originals with where they were thickest about a third of the way up the shaft, and they tapered towards the bottom end and then tapered towards the top, yeah, it makes them a lot more wieldy, but they're massive. They're pretty massive weapons. You don't, yeah. It's not,
and the ones he's
not like
using
a spear.
Yeah, the ones he's using are definitely not full weight because they make them out of PVC pipe and stuff. So,
okay.
So it's a lot easier to pull off some of these tricks. But
yeah,
yeah, I'm not gonna do some of the things that I've done in spear fighting. I'm not gonna try that with a 16-foot pike. It's just not gonna work.
I'll have to see if I can dig them up again from where I found them online. But there were some, I guess, accounts from the Swedish army after getting their butts handed to them in Poland, because the Poles didn't really like fighting with pike and shot and chose to address those formations as they did in their own native land. But the Swedish idea, slightly later than Silver, tended to be like, it's useless to fence at distance in formation with pikes, as others would like to, because you're essentially you're taking a formation-based form of warfare and you're now relying man-to-man to resolve that, when you should just run in and charge and do the thing that pikes were meant to do, and then drop them and break the formation. I'll have to see if I can find them again.
That does seem to be the big issue with pike warfare, that people had, they get to the point where the weapons are starting to cross and think, okay, if we get to there, it's going to be really, really bad. So let's stick out there and fiddle around a bit. And a lot of it seemed very, very indecisive, because the moment you get to push a pike, like dozens of guys go down instantly. It's like, it's just, yeah, it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, and I think some of the more dominant ideas around using the pike formation offensively, aside from the Swedish innovations on tercios and overall battle formations, like you get to that point, and instead of trying to fence the distance, move in, displace their points, and whether they have their pikes or not at that point, you're in. You can do whatever you want, because they're now having to react to now all of you in their formation.
I've just sent the text from Swetnam on the pike, single combat with the pike, which is their stick point in the ground and wave it back and forth and then kick the point up. So if it's similar to Silver, then obviously it was a reasonably common English thing.
There is an illustration which I will try to figure out if there's a way that I can get it on my screen to share it, from one of the Germans, and it doesn't look like it's going to work for me, but it is one of the few contemporary illustrations of pike fighting that I have been able to find anywhere online. And what we see is the under officers at the ends of the files preventing their people from breaking the files in the back ranks, which would make sort of sense, because you want that block to stay there so that if cavalry comes in on your flank, they're ready to turn and face them. But where the two pike formations are meeting, in the middle, you have billmen, you have gunmen with their muskets clubbed, you have people with swords and with daggers, and the first two ranks on both sides have basically all dropped their pikes. You can see them lying around their ankles. And the under officers are preventing everybody else from getting into that scrum, because obviously the tendency would be to break out of your formation and go around and try to help the guys in front. They seem to be trying to keep the bulk of the formation together and let just the first 2 or 3 ranks fight it out with bills and knives and hand weapons. It's a rather ugly illustration. And it's about 50 years before silver, if I remember the dating correctly. As I say, I'm trying to figure out if there's a way that I can put it up on the screen so people can see it. It's fairly common
Just for
online.
logistics, I've set it so that anybody can share their screen, permission-wise.
Yeah, it's just that this is on my other computer.
Ah.
And I'm trying to figure out if there's a way that I can send it to the computer that I'm using to stream with. So let me just, I'll play with this and I'll put it up if I can find it. Go on.
I'm curious if we have any other regional folk on the line who haven't gotten to say hello, because I know like Paul and Stephen. Great to see you again. Alex and James are here with me in our area. If anybody wants to say hi, but like there's some other folk. Hi, Tom.
Hey, I'm Tom. Yep, I'm from Colorado. I've been doing this a little bit over a decade. I studied the last few years. I've been studying with a group in Colorado Springs, a fellow named Ben Roberts, who does English, and we like someone else was just saying, he does. We do a lot of everything. Backsword. Right now, before we were shut down, we were doing Lettle for our long sword. So it's been interesting. I actually started out with Fiore 10 years or so ago with a group here in Colorado, and I trained with some guys in Denver doing German. So I get around quite a bit. I try to get out to Italy every other year or so and study with the Marazzo guys in Lucca. So yeah, so I've been doing the English thing now for coming on 4 years. God forbid I'm going to say this, but silver's not my favorite, but pretty good stuff though. Yeah.
Say hi to the Ben Storby.
I will do that. And I met Stephen at this last September. I took his sword and buckler workshop in Chicago, and I think we were in the Saviano class together. So that's good to meet you all.
So did you like the premise of the sword and buckler class that I don't know if people are aware of my current working hypothesis on
133.
A grand total of 9 lines on sword and buckler, which is basically say sword and buckler and sword and dagger are all one, saving that you may parry single with the buckler. I'm sure somebody's got the text in front of them, but and then you have to go back to the sword and buckler and say, well, what's a sword and dagger, and say, well, what's he telling you to do there? And half of the stuff in the sword and dagger says, do exactly what I told you to do at single sword, but just with a dagger. And so you need to go back to the single sword. But if you do the stuff like the close play that he describes, if you do that, it starts to look incredibly like 133. And
right.
133 is silver, and 133 are both explicitly parry with the sword, not with the buckler. And I've discussed why this, certainly, force-wise, you can put the buckler in the way of pretty much any cut, but it's so easy to flow an attack around a buckler, and so I find that if I'm fighting sword and buckler, if I go to parry with the buckler if I use the buckler as my primary parrying weapon, I do very badly. And if I use the sword as my primary parrying weapon, as silver and 133 tell you to, I do a whole lot better, and all my students concur. Yeah, so, but basically, yeah, silver just touches on what happens in the close fight. But one of the other people we had who came to that class, oh God, brain stopped working. German 133 guy. Roland, yeah, sorry. I was just having a senior moment there. Yeah, Roland turned up and I was doing techniques and said, well, what's that? And he said, well, that's the shield knock out of 133. That's a stab knock out of 133. That's, yeah, so the parallels are quite uncanny. Not because I think there's any actual link there, but just because I think it's good technique's good technique. So I tend to teach some additional 133 material to people, but when I fenced Roland, I actually found that he was very poorly set up to defend against the
Silveresque stuff.
What's that?
The Silveresque stuff.
Yeah.
Because I found the same thing. I just sat in sort of open fight and just attacked on triangle steps, and most of the time I was just blowing through his attempted defenses.
Well, and I found that when I refused to allow him to bind, I could pretty much dictate the fight.
Yeah.
The middle of the fight, I went, all right, let's play the bindy windy game. And it's like, and then after a while, I thought, no, let's not, because he's actually very good at it. Yeah. So, but yeah, if you want to play that sort of more based around open fight play where you denying the bind, and it's very much a secondary thing, which I think it is, then the people who do 133 find that very difficult to deal with. And
yeah, I concur entirely with that.
Yeah. I guess it depends how you do 133.
I think that's the very big problem. The very big problem with 133 is that it assumes a prior knowledge of all the sort of wide play, and then sort of says, all right, well, here's the close play that most people aren't that familiar with, and we don't have that assumed knowledge. It talks again and again about the common fencer, and I think a lot of what Silver explicitly describes, again, as I was saying to Duncan earlier, because Silver felt like the principles were starting to be lost. He's explaining.
Oh, there we go.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one.
Pikes.
There's the pikes, and look at the mess in the front rows.
Yeah.
But they're not fighting each other with the pikes. The pikes are all around their ankles.
Yeah.
There's quite a few guys who are getting in with the pikes. I noticed there's a guy with a halberd here who's shortened it right up. There's pretty much only the head of the halberd in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of guys like that, actually.
But if this is the sort of thing that was happening, then to me at least, Silver's pike plays make more sense, because you're looking to close and get past the points of the pikes in order to try to break into the other formation and break them up.
I didn't know who I might meet or what they might ask.
Anyway, if anybody's interested in studying this some more, I will gladly email it to you, or you can probably find it on the web yourself.
I mean, looking at what Silver says about pikes, it appears that, I mean, he's got some of it which is, stab at him with it and then fly out, and there's some of it which is crash in and like use a dagger or whatever. But so it doesn't seem that they're entirely devoted. He's entirely devoted to the idea of it's always got to be straightforward and get in close.
Well, that is where he ends up. That's the bottom thing is go to the knife.
Okay.
That's the only way, because he doesn't, I don't think, expect that you're going to actually be able to successfully wound your opponent with the pike. All you can do is annoy him and keep him from wounding you. I mean, his principal attack is against the shins. Well, let's just make him jump back, don't you think? I don't know. As I say, I'd love to be in a position to play with it, but I haven't figured out, as everybody else is still trying to figure out, where to keep a couple of 16-foot pikes, or how to get them from here to there.
Something a bit more practical is, I don't know if you guys have noticed that Black Armory has finally made the English billheads, the synthetic English billheads, and I've just texted the link for everyone. But we've got 4 of them on order, and they're axe heads, which we've been using for Viking stuff. Fantastic. So I am very keen to get hold of these and do some bills.
We just use steel axes for axe heads, which I've actually got a I'm playing around with making a specific glove to use inside a shield or a buckler, because I'm particularly, this is getting a bit off Silver, but with the large shield, I'm sick of having binding shields and having one shield edge smack my hand. So it's also a problem with, as you probably know, with axes hooking around behind shields, you can end up getting the shield hand. But yeah, so I'm playing around with armoring up a left-hand glove on just the bits that are showing when you're holding a shield.
Possibly an easier option is you get half a boss and put it on the inside of the shield to protect the front of your hand.
Yeah, I'd prefer not to, change the shield too much, but anyway.
I've got to get going. Thanks for hosting this. I guess just briefly, so I'm not just a random face.
Gareth, you're host, so why don't you nominate somebody else as host before you go?
Oh, no, I'm not going.
James.
That was James.
Yeah.
Oh, that was James. I'm sorry.
So where are you based, James?
I'm sorry?
Where are you based?
I'm in Seattle. I actually split my time between Seattle and Aberdeen, Washington, which is out on the coast, because I work as a merchant mariner in my normal job. I started with Nathan Barnett almost 5 years ago now, I think, doing silver. I have a Royal Navy War of 1812 reenactment background that I'm still pretty involved in, that I'm actually going to a meeting to about now. I don't do much silver specifically anymore. I've branched out into the more, depends on who you ask, controversial, like step saber interpretation with what news sources we have around that, specifically like 17th century. I've been doing a lot of work with that, with things that I can dig up as well as what other people have published. And then we also have the Iwanowski system. He was actually Polish, so it's probably more Iwanowski. He was around in the early 19th century and says in his system, I've written this in the way that we do it in Poland for the Russians, but he deals specifically with a basket-hilted saber, pipeback saber. And from what I can interpret from what I've seen of his dismounted drills, it's kind of this it's very silver-esque, and silver still informs a lot of my interpretation because that's kind of what I know best as far as saber goes. I also, little feather in my cap, helped Polish saber company, Silk Fencing, get their first standard production basket-hilted saber off the ground. So hopefully we'll see that soon.
It'll be
Oh, nice
interesting to
work.
see that source. What dates that source?
I think it's specifics. I think it's pre 1820. I think I'll have to. I found a PDF copy that I neglected to save, and I'm finding it back. I'm having to find it again because all of my computer electronics got destroyed recently because of water. So I have to find where I got it again. Yeah, but it's very interesting. It's especially since most cavalry saber drills in Western Europe, you stand as if you were to be riding a horse. A lot of his footwork is basically silver, and a lot of the actions basically start from at the shoulder level. Your basket's presented forward, and because as you would be on a horse, it's a little bit harder to try and reach further past your basket to attack your arm. A lot of your cuts basically start from shoulder height or above, and you're basically flicking it around out and adopting elongated positions from the cut, and then resetting if you need to a retracted position to kind of keep your cuts going. So
Fascinating.
Okay.
yeah, we'll see how well it actually works. As far as I can tell, I haven't found anybody who has dedicated lots of time to exploring that, aside from Jerzy Miklaszewski in Poland. But he's since moved on to other sources. So yeah, I'll see what I can find on that and interpret.
Yeah.
Steve and Gareth, you might be interested in this. I inherited this off Julian, actually, which is a drill manual from 1895 of the Mounted Troops of Australia. And it has a small section on dismounted sword, and it's really interesting.
You're right. I am interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 19th century was a lot more dynamic than people tend to do. So this is what we base our super advanced broadsword course on, because it's got some really interesting stuff in it.
Fascinating.
If I'm ever allowed to come to Melbourne again,
Yes.
we can do a day of it.
That would be great, actually.
So what was it? You weren't allowed to go to Melbourne because that was the plague capital, and now
And
you
now
can't
we're
go
not
to
allowed to go to
Melbourne
Melbourne.
because he lives in the plague capital.
Yeah. Those.
Right. It'll be over in a couple of days. But
And meanwhile, we haven't had an active case of COVID in Tasmania for 6 months.
Yeah. I'm a little envious about that.
Yeah. Oh, we're just being totally blasé about it because we're sitting on an island. So yeah, what's happening? Oh yeah.
You're going to get us a little angry here,
10,000
Stephen.
Americans have died. Yeah.
We're losing about 2 people a minute here.
Oh
Yeah,
geez.
it's awful.
Yeah.
And it's just completely nuts. And the people I know who are working in healthcare
You ready?
are just right out flat. They've got,
Yeah.
in a lot of parts of the country, they've got absolutely no ICU beds available.
Wow.
And I just had one friend who was in the hospital for 3 weeks and on a ventilator for about 2 weeks of that. So
Wow.
good on you. I mean, if we had gotten on top of it as we should have at the beginning, it would never have been as nice as being on an island, but we could have been doing a lot better.
Anyway, on that cheery note, guys, I've got to go. Thank you for hosting, and we should do it again. But next time, you get to wake up early, and we'll have the evening shift.
Was that Julie at the door there?
It was Julie at the door, so
Say hi to Julie for me.
Will do.
Off
If
the
you're
bridge
still
with me.
here when I get back, I'll join back in, but that's not going to be for a few hours, so I doubt it. Okay.
Well,
Take care, Paul. I'll be in touch.
I thank you for coming, Paul, very much. It's delightful to have met you. And he's gone.
On that, I'm going to have to fade as well.
All right. Well, we've had a couple of people come in the door who haven't turned on their cameras and introduced themselves. The blue snake, by the way, is my son, Michael, who's doing tech support for us. And the that's who he is. Oh, and here's the lady from Q, Gareth.
East Q, if you don't mind.
Oh, right. Well, very different, yes. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Lauren, nice to meet you.
Hello,
Where are
nice
you
to meet
based?
you, everyone. I'm in Calgary, which is in Alberta, Canada.
Okay. And are you doing silver there, or is it just an interest?
It's mostly an interest. Our group, before we were locked down again, was doing some Swetnam. We were doing staff because of, well, you needed a 2-meter distance, and staff just seemed to be the perfect thing. And silver is from the same, about the same era, a little bit earlier. So we were kind of starting to look at that. So just some interest in overall information on silver. I thought I would listen in.
Okay. Well, the man who has done probably the most with silver's quarterstaff just left. Who else does silver quarterstaff here? I know Duncan does some. Okay, and Tom is waving, but hasn't unmuted himself.
Sorry about that.
That's
People coming in
okay.
and out. Yeah. We do quarterstaff, silver quarterstaff in Colorado Springs.
And how do you find that as compared to what Swetnam teaches? Is it pretty similar, or do you? I suppose Stephen probably is looking at
let me just answer that real quick. We have usually use Swetnam's quarterstaff and apply that more as to longsword, because that's one of the things he says. Well, the longsword is nothing but the quarterstaff, basically. So we're usually doing longsword when we're doing Swetnam quarter staff.
It's interesting. Silver says exactly the same thing.
He does.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, it's like anything. It's like you use your principles well, and then the mechanics of the weapon will dictate what you can and can't do. So the longsword has some advantages. The big stick has other advantages. So the big stick is my favorite, by the way. You can't beat hitting people with a big. You can't beat hitting people with a bigger stick.
Yeah. How very English of you, Duncan.
Oh yeah.
And let's see, we have Chandler and Mosh. You want to come in and just introduce yourselves? Turn your cameras on and say hi. Or not.
Good morning.
Hi, Mosh.
Morning for me. G'day. I'm actually one of Gareth Jones's students, so I'm jumping in every now and then.
Okay. And does anybody know Chandler? Okay. What's the biggest thing, those of you who teach silver, that you teach differently now than you did when you first approached the system? Have you guys found things that you weren't looking for as you've been going along with it?
Definitely. I'll start off on this one. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I find fascinating and incredibly frustrating is that in both books, what silver does is have an enormous amount of implicit information that you can only really access when you've got other context or you've looked at it for so long. I mean, I know I've spoken to Paul about this, where his phrase about the two-handed sword only made sense when he went all the way back through Leto and Harley, and then came back and went, oh, right, now I understand. And I often have little insights like that too. And so really for me, it's finding those implicit pieces of information and then carrying them forward into what I'm teaching. And so what I'm doing now, in a way, while it looks sort of similar to what I started with, I think it's a lot richer, even though I haven't sort of deviated to a different text or anything. Has anyone else had a similar experience to that?
Over and over and over again. I mean, there's so much. I just recently had an essay published in this new book, Meditations on HEMA, and it was like, what have you changed your mind about? Was that people had to write an essay about what they've changed their mind about, and it was very interesting that most of the people who've been doing stuff for well over 20 years started off with some variation of what I said, which is just about everything. And that there's this constant process of, okay, I think in this case, Silver's telling us to do X. So I go away and do X, and then I think, all right, either it works, it seems to be a worthwhile thing to do, or it doesn't work. Unfortunately, sometimes it sort of works and you limp along with it for a while, and then some other bit of information comes in and says, all right, well, I don't think that's what he was intending us to do. I mean, like, there's some pieces in Silver where it says that whenever an attack is launched at your left or right side, you should move the foot circularly away from the direction you're being attacked. And I mean, firstly, that I've seen people try to interpret that to mean that you should always do that in any fight, when it explicitly contradicts what he says in other places. So you've got to realise, okay, in the preceding passages, he's talking about variable fight. So, all right, we only do that in variable fight. But then if you just move the back foot, it seems to work, and it's sort of, I limped along doing it like that for 10 years. And then thought, oh no, actually, if I move, that means I'm crossing the feet, and he just doesn't cross the feet anywhere else. There's no other action which requires me to cross the feet. So I started doing like a step with both feet, like a little, and I've got a video up on Staccato YouTube of this. And all of a sudden, not only was the parry a lot better, but it ends up with my point basically in the other guy's face at the end of the parry, and it's just like such a better position. Is this what Silver intended? Who knows? But it fits. If it fits the text and it works in practice, it might be right. That's all you can ever say. Right? And if you get too wedded to a particular interpretation, I mean, I'm still tweaking things after 30 years. So
I think if you're in this game long enough, Stephen, the one thing you learn is don't get wedded to anything, because something will come along and you'll go, oh God, yeah, and then you have to change everything all over again. That's weirdly enough. But the reason we even got into Silver is because I do lots of and work with other martial arts and stuff. It was Silver's grips and closes section that got me into it. I was looking for different things and seeing that. So I've always gone back and forwards with Silver, but not really got to grips with it. No pun intended. Started looking at the grips and closes section just for ideas of adding other fight skills in, and didn't quite make sense. But again, it's because I hadn't studied the principles. So we then went back to the principles, started studying them, studied grips and closes, went backwards and forwards, and then it all started to link in. And his grips and closes was what got us into it. And doing that then made me understand time, distance, place, judgment, etc. Then studying that, especially place, and once you really understand place, that then changed everything else. And what I mean by that is that, as I said this to Lauren, I said this to other people, once you understand, especially time, distance, place, you start to see it everywhere. All good fighters do it. Most of them don't realize they're doing it, but they all do it. And that was what sort of zoned me into, like, okay, Silver's principles must be good because A, they work, B, all of a sudden I'm fighting an awful lot better. C, my students are fighting an awful lot better. And D, when I show it to other martial artists, it clicks with them. So it's one of those things. So that, and then that then spread. So then obviously you start, okay, so this Silver guy is quite good, and then you start looking at all the other sections and so on. But weirdly enough, it was the grips and closes for us. I wasn't really looking at Silver's the whole thing. I was just looking at other ways of getting close into people and binding with people and getting into that real close like fight. But that then got me into everything else. So I'd say if you want to look at if you want to talk about one thing, it was understanding place, but properly understanding place, and then extrapolating that out to everything else, and it actually does for me. But his principles, the grounds are like the governors. Once you understand them, I say this to everyone, I'm a sort of evangelist on it. You see it everywhere. There you go.
Yep, I'd agree.
Who wants to talk about the defensive actions that Silver includes in things you do when you are in the place? Anybody want to discuss the fact that it's not just offensive actions that he suggests are appropriate to do when you're in the place? Because a lot of people suggest that place is where you have the opportunity to offend without danger. But that doesn't seem entirely true, because he says slip, he says go back, he says traverse as being things that you would do in the place.
I don't think it's that simple. I don't think place is one thing or the other. Place is the opportunity. Place is what allows you to do whatever it is you want to do. As I've explained it to other people, is when I'm using those principles well, it's all, and again, this sounds quite arrogant. It's not really like this, but this is the way I think about it. When I'm using the principles well, it almost doesn't matter what the other person does. I'm not interested in what they're actually doing. What I'm looking for is the opportunities that the place allows me, whether that's to defend or to attack or whatever, whether that's me moving into them or them moving into me. So I'm almost sort of thinking, I don't really care what you're doing. All I'm looking for is the perfect opportunity or place, time, distance to finish this. And that sounds really arrogant, and it's not, because it goes wrong a lot. So that's what I think. Thinking of place as defensive or offensive is thinking of it sort of two sides of the same like coin. You can use place. You can use place to do either.
Constantly winning, winning or gaining the place. It doesn't matter whether you come to them or they come to you.
No.
Right, it's this thing. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
There you go, Al. You're on.
Okay, good.
This is Alan. He's one of my guys. He trains with me.
Pleased to meet you.
Yeah, part of Duncan's group in St Helens, which is near Liverpool, in the northwest England. Been doing it for 8 years and studying silver for
9 years. Yeah. Yep.
The most important thing,
just excuse me for a bit.
The most important thing that I think Silver has to say is place. It works for pretty much every fight you look at, including
you can tell that he's one of my guys, can't you?
It just works.
Let me give you a little example, a little story. I'm not going to say who because that's not actually important. There's a pretty good humorist, and I couldn't get to one of his events, and one of my guys did. It was Ango, not Alan. And they were fighting backsword, doing a lot of sparring together. And the conversation basically went like this. The other guy said, I've tried every technique I can think of. I can't hit you. And my guy said, I'm not using technique. I'm using time, distance, and place.
I mean, sure. I think that kind of description of general principles is one of Silver's great strengths over many other manuals, which I think still include them, but includes it more implicitly than him. Which I think is really interesting. Yeah. Sorry, I don't really have a point to make beyond that.
I guess one of the to me the elephant in the room whenever people discuss silver is that when whenever I see a discussion about silver with people who don't do silver, there's this whole thing of like, we're talking as if the principles are really explicit, which I feel they are. But when people who don't do silver, they say, well, talk about this. So, well, people can't even seem to agree what the principles are. And as you're no doubt aware, I'm concerned that in the last 10 years, there's been a movement to really, to my mind, to really undermine the principles and to whether that be people like Vincent Chevalier, who's I understand a modern physicist who can't seem to grasp the concept that people in Silver's day didn't understand Newtonian physics, Anyway, there are people with various agendas that because silver doesn't like, unlike all of the other, every single other English text explicitly says, they use almost the same language as silver and say, but they say explicitly say, when you strike, you need to step in after that strike. You need to lead with the hand and step in after that strike. The Germans say that explicitly. And because silver doesn't say that explicitly, there's this attempt to create, I don't even know how to work this weird sort of shuffle into distance and only attack from within distance. Which and I actually get the
because people don't.
I actually get the Ramos, what's his name, Ramos, who set up the George Silver Facebook group. He's apparently just shy of 7 foot, and if I was just shy of 7 foot, I wouldn't be doing a lot of passing in. I'd be working at the edge of my distance, which would be well out of their distance. So I mean, it works for him, but I mean, how does it work for, my son's 5'7". He still wins tournaments, but he's not going to get within distance. If he tries to shuffle into distance, the way it's being described, he'd be clubbed like a baby seal.
But again, do you think that's a part of a problem of everything we're talking about is it's a very physical activity and it's fighting, so it's meant to be chaotic, it's meant to be very physical, and for me if you look at it too academic, you then start to lose the whole reason for it even to exist. We have to look at it academically because we've got to do a lot of research, and you guys, especially people like Stephen, are way better than me at that. So that's cool because you guys do that. But again, Stephen, a lot of these arguments that you sort of get dragged into, I think, is because people get so obsessed with particular words or particular ideas, and I just want to say, just do it. Just go and pick up a sword, find a friend, and do it.
I agree.
If you want to understand.
When I turn around and say that, you know, I've been doing it, and I've taught, you know, people like Nathan in the US, who's been, God, you know, he's a disgustingly good swordsman. And second time I did a seminar with their group, it was like, oh God, you really got what I was teaching in the first seminar, didn't you? So I'm not sure how much more I can teach you. But, you know, the principles of true and false times, as I understand them, have been working for 30 years. And pretty much, if I do a false time in a fight, which, you know, you don't do a false time in your initial action, but, you know, in the to and fro, you'll start to, you know, 2 or 3 actions in, it's very easy to slip into a false time. And every time I do a false time, if I'm up against somebody competent, like my son, I get clobbered. And it's so obvious that that's how it works.
Yeah.
And yet you turn around and say, well, this has been working for us for 30 years. And it's like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. It's like experience is just thrown out the window.
Yep.
It's very frustrating that, you know, 20 years ago we thought we had all these questions settled, and then people have turned around and started trying to turn. I mean, to my mind, Mike Edelson and is this is confirmed by people I talk to in the US. He's trying to turn all of Western swordsmanship into the Japanese swordsmanship he learned. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
there's an underlying what's the word I'm looking for? There's an attempt. It's not an honest attempt to interpret the sources. It's an attempt. He's got a conclusion that he wants to come to, and is going to shove the sources into that.
He's made the conclusion. He's looking for evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
Rather than going down that path too much, I do want to make a really important point, Stephen, that I think periodically questioning the assumptions or previous conclusions that you have is a good and healthy thing in scholarship. Now, that's not to say I'm agreeing with this particular hypothesis or anything. I'm just saying that revisiting previously decided matters and just confirming or modifying given new experience and new information, I think is a healthy thing to do, and it ends with a stronger final answer. That's probably the scientist in me saying that. That said, in this particular case, what I would love to see, and I haven't yet seen it from the people that are proposing this new interpretation, is the thing I would like to see is an overall system, really. I haven't actually seen it. I've just seen an objection to this particular point.
I mean, to be
And
fair,
that's you don't.
I'd just be happy to see them fight, like
Yeah.
actually against someone who wants to fight them, and
Yeah,
see
actually,
how
yeah,
their
that
interpretation
was
actually
good, yeah.
works,
Yeah,
using the
agreed.
actual timing of a fight, and not just sitting back and going like, okay, well, if he did this, I'll do this. Well, could you do that? I don't know. You could. So,
And it certainly worked for somebody like Ramos in South America, who's, like I said, apparently close to 7 foot tall, where his within distance is certainly not going to be my within distance. But, you know, does it work for me at 175 centimetres or 5'9"? And yeah, look, I agree 100%. I actually found the process of writing the paper that I did was I had to do a lot of research, and yeah, I'm glad that I got to do that. I found that an incredibly useful process. But it's, you know, it's really frustrating when people are saying, well, you know, whatsoever is done with the hand before the foot is true fight. Doesn't mean whatsoever is done with the hand before the foot is true fight. Like,
just while we've got a lot of people here, has anybody fenced anybody from that?
I mean, Mike Edelson's a good fighter.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen him since he started looking into silver. So I don't know how he fights now using silver.
Yeah, and
He was
I
always
guess
like-
I guess I do specifically with silver. Yeah.
Actually, I fought with both Corey and Mike.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you have to look at by saying, you know, I'd like to see him fight. I mean, yeah, I'm like Duncan. I'm a fighter. I've been teaching Dos Padres Eskrima for over a decade, and we're a fight school. But I'm also 64, going to be 65 in a month or so. And, you know, you have to look at that sometimes too. I mean, even though someone might be using certain kind of techniques, maybe somebody a little bit young, there's always somebody a little younger, a little stronger than Mike Edelson. You know, and Corey's not all that buff to begin with. But I do really agree with like what Gareth was saying. I think that, and being a science guy myself, I think you have to have a certain amount of respect for anybody that's willing to write, you know, do some studying, whether you agree or not, do some studying, write those ideas down, and then put it out to be, publish it to be put it out to peers to look at. There always has to be a certain amount of respect for those people, you know, whether you agree with it or whether you don't. You know, they're putting an idea forth, and I think that that's good, healthy stuff in HEMA. It opens a discussion, and I think sometimes you see that. I think sometimes in the Fiore world, you know, in the States here anyhow, it seems like, boy, it just doesn't seem like anything has really happened new with Fiore for so long, because it seems like if you're going to do something, one or two people have to say that that's okay, and everybody's afraid to just try something new because you got to be blessed by, I don't want to say any names, by so and so or so and so. But I think any kind of discussion is good, and I've read, you know, I read Corey's and original paper, and Stephen, your work, follow-up work on that was just awesome, and what a cool thing. You know, it opens a discussion. Whether you think they're right or wrong, who cares? You know, it's a good thing.
There sure was a lot more traffic on the sites when those discussions
Oh my
were going
God.
on.
That's true. And Stephen, your response, which was essentially the deepest dive into what a true time is that I've ever seen, was an amazing piece of work, and that wouldn't have existed without them.
oh yeah, I mean look, it's useful, and it's got me really thinking, oh, well, why do I think that? And diving into the depths of Aristotle, and
yeah,
I mean there are people out there. I think Vincent's trapped in a modern physics mindset. He just can't cope with the fact that people 400 years ago didn't see the world as he sees it, through a Newtonian or Einsteinian viewpoint. So that's, you've really got to look at the world through their eyes and say, when they were talking about time and distance, how did they understand it?
See, I came from it from a different direction, and what was very strange is that the modern way they were talking about time in the context of a fight never even occurred to me because it never made sense.
Yeah.
So when they started talking about it, I was just thinking, but it's a fight. That doesn't. It's all about tempo. That doesn't make. And then Stephen did like his and said, yeah, that's how I understood it, but not on a sort of bringing in Aristotle or anything. It was more an experience thing, and actually, as I said, doing it. And once you do it, you realise.
We talked about that comment that people don't understand time in an absolute sense.
Yeah.
In a fight, a time, if something is fast in a fight, it just means, it doesn't mean that your sword was traveling at X miles per hour. It just means that you were able to do that action in the time available to you. That's what we perceive as being fast in a martial sense. And if something's slow, then what that means is we don't have time to do it. We are unable to do it in the time available to us.
This is why your concept of slow hand, I always disagree with and didn't like until I got into conversation with you about it, and I finally understood what it was you were talking about. And I was like, oh yeah, now it makes sense.
Well, it's just
and as you said, it was the name slow hand, which I didn't like. I think really, not the actual concept.
I've tried to get away from that, but people keep dragging me back to it. That it's just, it's not a name I came up with, but it's a name that somebody came up with, and obviously it's a pun on my surname. It just means that. But everyone, if you give a sword to somebody and stick them in open fight and say do a cut, they don't swing the hand as fast as humanly possible. They just, because they instinctively know if I do that, I was swung through before my foot's brought me into distance. So they time the hand with the foot. But the thing is, as I've shown over and over and over again, which some people steadfastly refuse to accept, is that doesn't mean that the hand is tied to the speed of the foot. In fact, it absolutely means it's not. It means that
it's not.
That I can speed that hand up. I can change direction, and my whole fighting style is based around bringing the hand in at just fast enough so I'm not creating a target, and getting that basically almost like a forehand ward. You're basically coming into a forehand ward and then coming in behind it, but you don't want to start in a forehand ward because that limits your just sort of cutting into it as you attack.
It was interesting you talking about like speed, and the last sort of big gathering I sort of went to, which was actually about December last year before everything went wrong. I was fighting a lot of people I'd never met before, and quite often got the same comments off a lot of people. Oh, but you're quite fast. You're quite fast, and I'm thinking, I'm 40, and I'm a bit overweight. I'm not fast at all. And I said, but again, I was explaining to people, said, no, I'm not fast. And then you start talking about silver, and some people's eyes glaze over, and some people start to get interested and say, no, it's not that I'm fast, it's the timing. And then you start to explain it. So it was interesting. It's interesting that people start to perceive it as being fast, and it's not fast. It's just, as you said, working within the time allowed.
I actually gauge one of the ways I gauge that students are advancing is when they start realizing that the more experienced students aren't faster than them, that it is just about timing and about being in the right place at the right time, and yeah, time and place and just economy of motion.
That's why I said. That's why I said it's so important. It's so vital, and the way Silver teaches it, and the way he talks about it to me is pretty unique. And it seems to be unique because when I explain it, I said I've explained it to lots of other martial artists, and they all get the principle, but they've never thought about it in that way, and they've never seen it written down like that.
Yeah, and I've had that same experience with Gareth. You know, Stu McDonald in Melbourne. Yeah, he just said that having time and distance and timing explained to him in Silver's terminology just opened things up to him, and he went, okay, I knew this, but I didn't have a language to explain it until now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a bit recently, and I think again, probably the scientist in me wants to start classifying things, and I think broadly the classifications aren't helpful, but I think there's a shift in what we see where what Silver's describing as sort of the old traditional English fight, if you will, is what I've come to think of as an evolved fight. So there's no real design behind it. It's just what works, and it's kind of come about in a Darwinian sense of if you put a sword or a staff or whatever in a person's hands and they start to fight over generations and generations, what evolves versus sort of the later, more designed fights, which I think look more, like Dicestra and whatnot, that have, geometry brought into it. And so I think what I have been theorizing about is that split is actually what Silver was objecting to, which is why I think he's trying to write down the principles that have naturally evolved, which is why I think when you start reading it, so many people that are just have done different sorts of fighting or know different styles or just a sort of are brawlers or what have you, it speaks to them because he's talking about the thing that humans naturally do when fighting, but describes it in this way. Does that make sense to everyone?
Kind of, he was the first person to write it down in a way that can be understood.
Yeah.
Because he felt he needed to.
Yeah, because he
felt it was being lost.
Right, yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah, well, of course, his whole second book was lost to us until the 19th century. And one wonders, what might have been different had he published the second book, had he actually finished the second book. What revision, from what I have read in Paul's book about the manuscript, it seems like he was in the process of correcting it, the early sections, when he
I'll
put
go
it
and get the manuscript.
Huh?
I'll go and get the manuscript. Obviously, a facsimile, but not
okay.
Correct. I'm not that rich.
Good idea.
I'll take you guys to the manuscript. Where am
Sort of an informal tour of Stephen's house here.
Yeah. Right. There you go. That's 350-year-old sword.
Nice. Very nice.
That's a Schiavone, is it?
Yeah. Although the Italians always get grumpy when you say it like that. They say it's a hard C, schiavona.
Schiavona.
And I say, well, I'm an English speaker. We've got to get the Italian words wrong. So
Yeah.
you'd be interested to see that because it's very cool.
Now, while you got that in your hand, Stephen,
Yeah.
before you go away, all right.
Yeah.
It looks like you can easily put your thumb up in that by sliding your hand back far enough that it's over the pommel, right?
There's a thumb ring, so I could.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I could, do a saber grip if that's what you want it, where you want to go.
If you wanted to put the point in, you could put your thumb up to do that.
I could do a saber grip. Yeah.
Yeah. And those of you who have seen original swords from the period around 1600, a lot of people keep telling me that the baskets are really cramped, but the pictures don't look like they are. They look like there's plenty of room to move your hand around inside that basket.
That's what I found. Yep. This original.
I think that a lot of the military basket hilts, like from the 18th and 19th century, are pretty small compared to the ones that Silver would have known.
There you go. That's brief. There's his brief instructions.
All right.
That's the and you've got things like you've got crossed out words. So the people who are turning around saying it's a finished, completed work. It's got crossings out. It's got it's got words sort of written in the. What's this? There's a couple of nice little bits and pieces here that that are worth having a look at. If I just can't remember which page they're on.
You know, say, Stephen, while I look at that, it just started reminding me that recently when we were looking at the section, the single dagger against the light weapon, we were looking through it and we all actually agreed that the way it was written, it seemed to be sort of as if somebody had mentioned it at the end. They went, "You haven't done any dagger play, George," and he'd written, "Oh crap," and he just put it at the end quick. It's quite quick and it's quite simple. It's just like it does read like he's thrown it in and meant to go back to it. Like, oh yeah, it works. We actually tried it and did a lot of work with it. But it does read like he's thrown it in, and to me, obviously would go back to it later, but obviously never.
Has anybody done? I did some of the dagger work, and he says there are no parries at the dagger, and that it's just all of the principles of time and distance and place. Just, and I use that like create a threat, draw a response, and then basically draw a counter attack, and then go in for the final attack. I find that incredibly effective in even more so in dagger than with sword.
My understanding.
This is cute. Can you see that little? Oh, all right, that little thing there is like a little doodle where he's spilt some ink and he's turned it into a little hand with a little pointy finger.
Yeah.
And there's stuff like that. There's stuff like that throughout the manuscript.
Now that the end sections where in the printed copy, like the one I have from Paul, it looks like it's sort of an outline or maybe a diagram or a tree of decisions or something.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Have a look, by the way. There's a whole section here that's been crossed out. That's in chapter 5. So that's the grips. Yeah. that's but let's go to the last section. So where are we? Yeah, here we go. This is the some of the stuff you're getting.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so it's real sort of, yeah.
Okay. Can you bring that closer? Yes. Okay. It looks a lot like the notes that I took in class when I was in college.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. There was a system of note taking that I was taught where we did that sort of thing with the stepping in of columns across the page. Yes.
It's very, yeah, it's the last section's a really sort of stream of consciousness.
It does read like that as well, yeah.
Yeah, and there's I find it very disingenuous when people take individual tiny little snippets out of context. There's one section there. Where's my copy? I'll get. There's the one section I talked about in my the type, yeah, of place, strength, and time. This is in Sundry Kinds of Fight, where he says the time of the foot is when you step forward to strike, when you gather towards your own right side. And then he says the time of the hand and foot is when you tread your ground in course to strike. Yeah, and it sounds almost like it could be the same thing, but when you analyze and people take these single statements out of context, but obviously he's not saying. So you could say step forward to strike and tread your ground in course to strike are the same thing, but then he's saying, well, one's a false time and one's a true time, and that makes no sense at all. So obviously they mean something different. So you then got to sit down and analyze. And so if I step forward to strike, if I step forward to shake your hand, I'm not, if I step forward to shake your hand, I'm stepping forward to shake your hand. I'm stepping forward to do something. So one precedes the other. And yeah, there's some, and there's a whole section here which one of my senior students and I've been discussing that is it general or does it just refer to one fight? And I've already talked about the thing where it says to move your foot circularly away from the direction you're attacked. And if that's a universal principle, it sort of makes no sense because it contradicts what he says about in garden fight. Well, in fact, when he says that all your gatherings in that fight be to your enemy's right, in that section he's talking about garden. In the section where he says move your foot circularly away, he's talking about variable fight, but he never explicitly says in variable fight move your foot circularly away from the direction of the attack. In garden fight, he just says garden, 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 and then says in that fight let all your gatherings be to your enemy's right. And so you've got
now. I find that fencing a left-hander, I want to gather to his outside, which means I'm moving to my right, his left. But I think that's the principle, right? You're gathering toward the outside line of the opponent.
Left-handers are always
that the way?
Yeah, left-handers are always an issue because, according to Silver, they don't exist. but I find him. Well, he says absolutely zero. Saviolo's, you know, who's Silver's contemporary, has a whole chapter on left-handers. But as far as Silver's concerned, that left-handers, yeah, just don't even exist. I did what you're saying for quite a number of years, and I just about 2 years ago I started. If I'm in garden, I'll constantly circle to my left, regardless of whether I'm up against a right or a left-hander. One of the things I think is really important in silver is the sort of universality of movement. So rather than in a lot of fencing systems, it's like, okay, if they attack here, move this way. If they attack there, move that way. And silver's just move to the same spot, whatever you're doing. So if I'm in garden, I'll grab my back sword. So I'm constantly moving around, and when I'm attacked, I agonise for years. Do you make your parry on a step with the right foot or with the left foot? And now I think it really doesn't matter. Your body's been telling you which way to walk for, you know, decades.
Yeah.
Just, you know, if my weight's on the front foot, I move the back foot. If my weight's on the back foot, I move the front foot, and I just keep moving. But it doesn't matter whether it's a left or a right hander. I think you still want to circle left. You still want to.
Interesting you say that, Stephen, because one of the things I tell from my experience and what I tell people for like years is that it doesn't matter whether your opponent is left-handed or right-handed. You haven't got the luxury to worry about it, and if you do start worrying about it, every time you come up against the left-hander, you'll start doing things differently. And in a fight, you haven't got time for that. But it's also that if you start to just don't care, I don't care whether you're left-handed or right-handed. And that mindset then gives me the freedom to what you're saying, to just do what I know I need to do. So for me, the mindset should be, it doesn't matter if you're left-handed or you're
previously, right. I'd said, right, when I'm up against a left-hander, I'll do a left leg forward, and when attacked, I'll come into the right, and that works. But it's, yeah, you've sort of got to like turn a switch in your brain. I'm up against a left-hander now, and yeah.
Admittedly, you can make those sorts of decisions a little bit further out of range, and then, you know, plot accordingly. And some of them, I mean, what William was saying about are you moving to the outside in each case? Well, your strategy is still the same, even though your implementation is going to be different whether they're left or right-handed. So
yeah, and I understand the concept of wanting to move to the outside because you're moving away from the grappling hand, moving away from the dagger, moving away from the buckler. But yeah, I think it's more important to move under the sword. And the principle Silver says, let all your gatherings in that fight be to your enemy's right, i.e. to your left. And if I'm moving this way and I'm parrying, I'm choking his blow up before it's entered into its full force, unquote. And if I'm moving this way, Silver explicitly says if I move to the right, it's a false time. So if I'm trying to parry this side of my body, if I'm stationary, this is how far my sword has to move. Right? If I move to the left, this is how far my sword has to move. So it's half the distance. If I move to the right, my sword suddenly has to move 1.5 bodies width. So by moving to the right, I'm just increasing the time it's going to take me to parry. So, and I see a lot of things. I see a lot of things in Silver where he's trying to, if you move the feet correctly, the amount of time, the amount of distance you have to move your hand is reduced. And that's always a good thing, because when somebody starts to move their hand, I'm thinking, beauty, all right, while you're moving your hand, I'm moving my sword somewhere else. So, yeah. Anything.
And that plays.
Yep.
That plays into the principle of getting the angles right and getting your position right. And weirdly enough, one of the guys I work with who teaches security guards and personal defense personnel and so on, a lot about knives and that sort of thing. All he talks about is the angles. One angle, you're safe. Slightly different angle, you're dead. And he talks, and it's a similar sort of thing. What he's talking about is about how to play the angles to your advantage. And that's pretty much exactly what you've just done there, Stephen.
Yeah. So it's just, and similarly with the reinterpretation that I did of so if I'm lying in staccato, and if I just move the back foot to make a parry, then it's nowhere near it. I've had to move my hand a lot further than if I move front and back foot. So I take a little step with the front foot and a slightly bigger step with the back foot, and all of a sudden my points. So I barely needed to move my hand. So if somebody deceives me, oh, I'm straight back there. Okay, rather than.
That's a lot of actions with the feet, Stephen. Do you find it works in practice?
But it's just a step. It's just a.
I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just curious. Do you find it works in practice?
Yeah, just step to the right foot, left foot.
Okay.
It's like anything, Gareth. Context is key. If you're playing a distance game well and you've got the time to do it, then yeah, it will work perfectly.
Of course.
If you're playing the distance game wrong, then no, it's not. It's not going to work. So.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and yeah, and if you're in the mindset of keeping them distance, yeah, that makes sense. But I think you're right. I think context is really important.
Context is absolutely vital. Context, and that's why for me, I talk about a lot. For me, Silver is not one thing or another. Quite often it's quite a lot of things together. It depends on the context, and his instructions allow you to use his instructions in so many different contexts.
Yeah.
If you get too specific, you're actually sort of hamstringing yourself.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree, and I think that and I think one of the very fascinating things about Silver compared to many other systems is his different fights, right? And I don't think they're just stances, if you will, or lyings or whatever. Like the fights are completely different fights. They've got completely different mindsets. They've got completely different actions. You know, some of them you're out fighting, some of them you're in fighting, and some of them you're grappling. And in a way, it actually looks a lot to me like a early form of like an MMA where you can mixed martial arts where you can go, oh no, now I'm using this style and now I'm going to flick over to the garden fight and use this, and now I'm going to flick over to the close fight and use this, which I think is really important given the context of what you're talking about.
Me, all that Silver's talking about is that if at first you can't hit them without them hitting you, use this stuff. It might work.
Yeah.
Use the rest of it. It might work.
Yeah, I agree. But I think, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think you could look at any of his individual fights and almost treat it like an entire style in and of itself.
Mm.
And each of them sort of side by side, there's a lot of cross information and a lot of things that they can teach one another. But it's almost like going from a whole style to a different style to a different style. And in the context of that, that's where I see Silver's grips or his grappling coming in, where he's saying, don't do it. But if you do need to do it, here's how, which is, and the instruction that's how you use a dagger, that's how you use a buckler, and so on. And I think, Stephen, that's one point where you and I disagree. I don't think Silver's sword and buckle looks like 133. I think it looks like somebody that's trained in a bunch of different styles that has also trained in that, if that makes sense, rather than this is all they know how to do.
But isn't that what Stephen was saying?
Oh, okay. So perhaps maybe
Steve,
we do agree then.
Yeah, I think when I fence open, like when I fence out of open fight,
yeah,
it doesn't look like 133 at all. But then I start fencing out of garden fight, and a lot of the things that Silver explicitly tells you to do. Okay, he says, do this.
Yeah.
Do sword and buckle like sword and dagger. Or do sword and dagger like single sword. So you've got to take sometimes 2 steps back.
Yeah.
So I'll parry in garden, cross with the buckler, parry, trap, hit, and if somebody attacks me, if I'm in garden and somebody attacks me here, parry, trap, hit. That's the classic shield knock.
Yeah.
Out of 133. That is, yeah.
Okay. Perhaps I think that's your words.
And in fact, 133 has one of the guards is true gardened. It's the crook or the crutch.
Yeah.
I find myself holding the buckler in a slightly different position, given that I've got a basket hilt. And
I don't want to cross there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that having a cross and not having a basket, not having a basket make a difference.
Yeah.
Anyone who says it doesn't, yeah.
And again, that goes back to what I was saying about how you use the principles and then the mechanics of what you're using, how the design of the weapon you're using will then change what you do, what you can do, what you can't do, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Principles still apply, but you'll apply them differently. For example, Stephen just said, if I've got a buckler and I've got a basket hilt, I probably don't need to use the buckler to protect the sword hand.
Right. Right.
So then that changes things.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Now, talking about the fencer who is not terribly tall or not terribly large, and I had hoped to have a woman instructor on this, but she apparently didn't get to make the call. If you're talking about a small and slight fencer, I've always felt that Silver had a lot to offer them. That there were a lot of things in the system that really work or would work well for them, but not being by any stretch of the imagination either small or slight. I obviously can't pressure test that.
My guy Alan there.
Yeah, I'm about 1 meter 60-ish, 80 kilos. I'm not big, but I can beat virtually anyone that doesn't understand silver. I can beat them.
Yeah, my son's 2 inches shorter than me, so he's about he'd be 170, and he's about 60 something kilos.
Mm-hmm.
He's not carrying any excess weight, but he's all of what's there is muscle, but yeah, there's not a huge amount of it. So yeah, he just closes in with people, and but he uses offensive actions to close the line to get in, and then use his once he gets a tempo advantage his hands are so quick that if he gets a tempo advantage over me, I'm gone. If I get a tempo advantage over him, he's got a chance. He's got a chance of parrying my time of the hand with his time of the hand, which is disgusting.
It's just one of my guys isn't on the call, but he's following it on the live stream. Malk Allen, and he's just made the point. Malk's over 6 foot, and Allen does often get the better of him.
Yeah. I think
one of my favourite moves is what I call my hand snipey shit. It is just with a long sword, you just you draw them in, then you start to lie low and just flick up into the hands.
Yep.
But the point being, he draws them in.
I draw the person in.
So again, he forces them to be in the time of hand, body, and foot, and just boom, done.
Yeah. And regardless of what people think about the various debates, you do want to draw people in. That a time of the hand will outspeed a time of the hand, body, and foot.
Mm-hmm.
And you can create something that I use quite a bit is when I get people who try to creep into just the outside edge of what Silver calls the first distance, wide distance. So they're just outside of close distance. If I attack them in the second true time of the hand and body, it can turn their movement into a false time, and you get that combination. Silver talks about combinations of so something that's a true time action, something that's not a tempo because it's not bringing you within distance, can be turned into a tempo by you attacking into it. But if you attacked into it within time of the hand, body, and foot, you'd probably be too slow.
Yeah.
But if you do it with the time and hand and body, it can be very, very effective.
Yep. Use that. Fully recognize that, Stephen. Yeah.
Yeah. So just that. Yeah, trying to play with combinations of time, and so the time that you think you're in isn't necessarily the time it'll be when you look at the combination of your action and the other person's action. So,
Malk's just reminded me of something. We did a demo once where, basically, Malk was drinking with one hand and defending people off with the other, and it was to demonstrate that he was forcing them to be in time with the hand, body, and foot. And he made sure he was definitely always countering with time of the hand, and he could drink and very easy, just bump, 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 because of the different timings. It was one of them silly things, but it sort of demonstrates the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas if you get, if you stay within distance, and I mean that's why flying out is so critical. Strike and fly out. And certainly the older I get, the more I really have to make sure. I used to like sort of staying in and sort of, okay, I can play this game and keep parrying and riposting, but yeah, the older I get, the more I want to give myself that time buffer of being back out again.
Now, I don't know here who has seen any of the episodes that I've put up, but I argue that Silver really doesn't want you to stay in close distance at all. He wants you to do your business and get out of there.
Yep.
Old mind. Agreed.
Which is not to say you can't. I mean, if you know what the rules are, you can break them, but knowing what the risks are.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people that it's not that anything is particularly wrong. If I do something which looks silly, but I know why I'm doing it, and I've got very good reasons to do it, except as you said, if you know why you're doing it, and you've got good reasons to do it, almost anything actually goes.
You're
You've got to get to that point where you understand what's going on, so you can do that. Or as Stephen said, basically, you can break the rules as long as you understand why you're breaking the rules.
Yeah,
and there's a risk, right? It's trade-offs.
There's always a risk. Everything's a risk. There's no guarantees in this game.
and yeah, as I always say to my students, if I'm not the most, sometimes I'll do stuff that's outside of my normal fencing style, because otherwise I'm the most predictable man in the cell. And if I'm not the most predictable man in the cell, then I'm not teaching you very well. Yeah, I'm not holding anything back. I'm saying this is what I think you should do. And oh, what a surprise! That's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But then people have got to take their own. You know, like I had a guy yesterday saying, "Oh, do I have to use this technique?" It's like, no. You use whatever technique you want. If you think this he's got a shoulder injury, and so if you can't do that, then just no, that's out of your repertoire. Don't do it. Or if it just doesn't work for you,
yeah, but you'll only know that by actually trying it. So
yeah, well, one of the things that I think is important is to separate, as this is a sport fencing thing, separate the concept of a bout and an assault. And it's a concept from sport fencing. An assault is where you're just fencing and you're just trying stuff. And it's important to sometimes fence just to say, look, I'm not that good at this technique, so I'm gonna try it a lot, and if I get hit, well, who cares?
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then sometimes say, all right, now I'm playing for sheep stations, as we say in Australia. So where all right, I'm gonna play to my strengths. If something's not working for me, I won't use it, because now I am actually playing for points.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or even more so, if you then extrapolate that to actual violence and fighting someone for like real, then you're going to do whatever works best for you and whatever works the quickest.
Yeah,
you're not going to start playing about, and that's for me, because that's the side of things that I really like to study and think of. That's the mindset that I always try and bring back into it. Was you can play the what if game forever. Well, the problem with the what if game is that it ties you up in like knots, and in a real fight, you don't get that luxury.
I got to check out. Been nice seeing you all, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Well, it was great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for coming along.
Yes.
Thanks, Alex.
Leave as well.
Thanks, Lauren.
An extra 20 minutes past when I thought I was.
I was going to say 20 minutes about an hour or so ago.
Yeah, not too bad. Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah. Well,
so I should.
As long as people are having fun, actually, there are people watching the live stream.
Oh, goodness me.
We've got like 5 people who have been stringing along with us thus far. We've had as many as 7. So we're holding their interest. If you know. Now, on a practical note, around here, and I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, in terms of tournament play, what we tend to see is a rectangular playing space. It's not like sport fencing where you're fencing in a narrow hallway, but it's like fencing in an alley. It's longer than it is wide, and it's not very wide. It's like probably 5 paces wide.
Hello?
So at a certain point, you're going to have to move to your right, even though Silver prefers you to move to your left. When do you choose to move to your right if you're up against an obstacle or getting close to an obstacle? What is the move to the right moment in silver. I
When
haven't
you're
found-
less likely to get stabbed.
Huh?
When you're less likely to get stabbed, you move.
It's basically, you move to the. It's one of them. You move to the right when it makes sense to move to the right. Beyond that, you're talking specific context.
And silver doesn't do that. For me,
Silver,
anyway.
I think, for me, Silver only uses specific context to illustrate his ideas. He's not saying always do this. He's saying this is an example. This is probably a good thing to do. Try it and then take it from there. So when do you move from the right? When it makes sense to. Beyond that, I don't know. For example, if we're talking about the closers and like grips, there's which one was it? See, we've got silly names for these things. I apologize, Alan. The follow through. When you move to the right, and someone's trying to grab him, and I'll grab their arm and I'll move to my right to take them past me. So in that context, I would definitely move to the right because that makes sense. So yeah, so it's just whenever it makes sense to.
So that gives you that's at the point where you're shoving the elbow.
When you're grabbing the arm, they've come to grab there, and I've grab their arm and just push them through. Well, pull them through because they're already moving in, and I'm just using the whole Lichtenau principle of strong against weak, weak against like strong. Just basically using it as a way of throwing them through. And it's number, I can't remember which one that is now. Al, is that number 4? 4.
I think 4.
Silver's 4th. Instruction in the grips and closes.
Yeah. Well, eventually we'll be able to start working on grips and closes again, but we're not allowed to do them right now.
No.
Yeah.
We are still meeting in groups of 10 or fewer, but you're always basically fencing. You're never closing because we're not allowed to close.
Yeah, we haven't done it for a while, obviously.
Which is frustrating because there are you would like to be working on back and forth on all the parts of things, but it's like, okay, well, that's all on hold for right now. We just put a pin in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the
Now what's
unfortunate
working?
reality at the moment.
Well, yeah, as I said, it was the grips and closes that got us into this whole thing initially.
I figured what the hell he was talking about in those grips and closes got us to think, is there anything to this?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out there is, and he knows his stuff. Silver, my understanding of Silver is he's trying to teach you in a proper fight how not to die.
Yes. And he's very considerate of you on a certain level, which is something I notice as I look through the material more. He's talking about the fact that you have the different fights, which, as someone was saying, was it Gareth or was it Alan? It's almost like different martial arts styles, but you've got a fairly heavy sword. It's between 2 and 3 pounds, probably anyway. And the fact that you have the ability to change fights means that you're not getting fatigued. If you're getting fatigued in Garden, you can move to open, and you're completely resting the muscles you use to hold Garden while you're in open. And if you start getting fatigued in open, you can move to one of the variable fights lyings. And once again, you've changed all the muscles that you're asking to carry the weight of the sword. Yeah, he's very considerate of it.
States that you can rest your muscles by changing.
Mm-hmm.
I forget exactly where, but
well, I think he says it more than once.
Yeah.
Because
I think you're right.
he talks about how if your opponent, for instance, assumes garden fight and stays in it all the time, you've got the advantage because you're using all 4 fights, and he's going to be fatigued and you're going to not be fatigued. That's one place he says it, but I know he says it other places as well. And the way he holds his staccato means that you can literally rest the sword against your thigh if you need to, and bring it up when you need.
There's not much effort. He talks about the problem of rapier fencers only use variable fight.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it's early on in Paradoxes he talks about. Paradox. Yeah. So yeah, anyway. So he took early on in Paradoxes. I can't. That he. Yeah, it talks about the importance of having 4 fights to their 1.
Yeah, that rings a bell. Yeah, it is there.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll find it some point.
And the other thing he's open to is the idea that you're going to wear the other guy down, that you're going to inflict a lot of very small injuries, but over time, that's going to give you the advantage if you can keep yourself from being hit. Even though you're not doing anything that's significant damage with any given attack, the repeated damage of a lot of little cuts to the sword arm or to other open targets, they're going to want to stop.
Well, either that or you just take a body part off. He's happy.
Yeah, there is that.
The important thing is don't be hit, and that's
yeah.
I run a tournament at my branch of Staccato every month where everyone fights everyone to 1 hit.
Mm-hmm.
And when people realise the first time they're hit, that's it, end of bout, they get very defensive, and they get very, well, not so much defensive, but they're not going to take any unnecessary chances, and and you get, it's quite common to get 4, 5, 6, 7 minute fights without anyone getting hit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's brilliant. And I got to the point where I'll just call a halt, and just say, right, you both won. Go to the
But again, Silver basically says that's what will happen.
Yeah, if 2 men be perfect upon their fight. Yeah.
Yeah.
The best we ever got was that 2 guys went for 13 minutes without getting a hit, and that's when I instituted that rule. I just said, right, stop. It's got to the point where I'd be really disappointed to see either of you lose, so you both win.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's one of the ways I explain Silver to people, though, because everyone understands that the basic underlying principles of don't get hit and hit them in that order.
Yeah.
Don't get hit is the most important one.
Yeah.
Then have the ability to hit them, and everything Silver does is basically that. Do not get hit, and make sure you can hit them.
No, I think I disagree slightly. I think there's one rule, which is do not get hit. The caveat being sometimes the best way to do that is to hit them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm not. I'm not saying that.
Another way.
I've had this discussion. I'm not saying that that's basically built into it. I'm not saying it's like I must not get hit, and everything I do is just defensive. No.
And
No, I agree. I agree. I'm just saying that I think it's I just think it's one rule, not two.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, I see a lot of sword arts, probably most notably modern sport fencing, where if you've got a situation where I've got a 75% chance of hitting you with a technique, but you've got a 25% chance of hitting me in return, that's a really good equation. If you're not dying. If you're dying, it's a really, really bad equation. Mm-hmm. That 25% chance, I mean, that's worse than a game of Russian roulette. So, yeah, silver, I think, would rather. There are a lot of techniques. I occasionally have students say, but if I do this, I don't hit the other person very often. I'll say, yeah, but do you ever get hit? So
not getting hit is the most important part in a real fight.
Yeah. So if you do a technique where you might have a 10% chance of hitting the other person, but they've got a 0% chance of hitting you, sooner or later those numbers have got to work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So that's
totally agree.
That's more important.
Now, the episode that I'm working on right now for the channel, I had a friend who is doing some cutting of meat with a sharp sword, in part inspired by your video, Stephen. And we put clothes on the meat. And I can see now why Silver says very little about cuts to the torso. Because if you have like ribs and you put a linen shirt and a silk lining and then almost anything for the outer layer, it's damned hard to actually penetrate a jacket or a doublet and a shirt with a cut. Even if the meat is lying basically on a table and you're trying to cut it, it's damned hard to get through all that. And if you get through it, if you're not perfectly lined up at the gap between the ribs, there's very little chance that you're going to get into the lung.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, this is brought out the guys in the heavy brigade at Balaclava were complaining that the Russians were wearing their greatcoats and were almost impossible to wound.
Yeah.
No. You've got to go for the face, or you've got to go for the arm or the leg, because you're more likely to get in and be able to penetrate. The rib cage is pretty flat, and you're trying to penetrate it all at once rather than coming in at the edge of the curve and then the sword following through.
And impact doesn't have, like, if you get an impact on your head,
mm-hmm.
you know, that hurts. If you get an impact, like even if it doesn't cut through, the
mm-hmm.
actual sheer physical impact on your arm will do some damage. All right.
Yes.
And but you've got a lot of give in your torso.
Yes.
So having said that, somebody belted me in the solar plexus yesterday, and that was fairly unpleasant. I said, "Yep, just give me a moment. I'll be back." But yep.
From a practical benefit, though, William, the nice thing about what you've discovered is that we get to practice HEMA wearing just padded jackets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have to have sort of steel plates protecting us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's interesting as you look at the target list that Silver gives you, and saying, you know, you're going to wound this, 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 or this, and the torso is nowhere in the list. It's the neck, it's the shoulder, It's the arm, it's the face and the head, and the leg are the targets that he lists. And I said, well, did he omit this by accident? No, he omitted it because there's a very good reason. You're not going to cut very effectively in a way that's going to be a fight ender if you hit into the torso.
And that's the thing, fight ender. The fight ender is the critical, or at least something that's going to prevent them from still swinging their sword at you.
Yeah.
It's also a difficult target to hit safely, which goes back to what we were saying earlier about the
Why I like
goal
the
here
hands,
to hit safely.
If someone can't use their hands, they can't use the sword. They
Yeah,
can't
well,
use
of course, I fence a lot of people who do Angelo Taylor Roworth style broadsword, right? That's the most common system around here for a military weight broadsword is they do Angelo Taylor Roworth. Those people will go over into Saber 5 like this if I get an effective head feint, right?
Yeah.
So the sword's way up here. I can very often cut them in the short ribs and get out safely in a tournament situation because they're doing this. And it's not true Gardent where they've got the blade down where it is in any effective place to do a parry if I come in low on the ribs. But I'm beginning to feel guilty about those points because I realize now there's very little chance if they were wearing even a shirt that I would actually cut them.
Well,
arm.
That's sport for you. So.
No.
Right, guys, I'm going to have to shoot.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it has been great. We have been at this for almost 2 hours and 3/4. Shall we say Merry Christmas to all and to all a good night or good morning
Absolutely.
for those of you in Australia?
Yeah.
It's almost good morning here as well.
Yes. Thanks for arranging.
Thanks,
I hope
guys.
we can do
Yeah,
it.
no, that's been good fun. It's nice to actually put some voices and some Liverpudlian accents and things.
Yes.
We of
Been
course don't
superb.
have accents in Australia, Gareth.
No, of course you don't. Been excellent, guys. Thank you very, very much. It's brilliant.
It's been fun, and we'll
Have a
be
great
back
Christmas,
to a live
guys.
stream as well.
Merry
Stay
Christmas,
safe
guys.
in those plague-ridden northern climes.
We're trying.
Yeah.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Hey,
Bye.
guys.
Cheers, guys.